Social media is full of warnings about narcissists. People describe them as toxic and manipulative, and in some cases, downright dangerous to those in their orbit. And they certainly can be. But what about narcissists who admit they have a problem and are trying to do something about it? From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Krys Boyd. Narcissistic personality disorder has been officially listed as a mental illness in the DSM for 45 years, characterized by symptoms including low empathy, an inflated sense of self-importance, and an unreasonable need for admiration. Those qualities don't sound easy to live with if there is a narcissist in your life. But my guest has discovered that some people who have been officially diagnosed with NPD are making the case that they deserve compassion, some recognition that it's also not easy to live with this condition and not impossible to change their behavior if they seek treatment. Nick Keppler is a freelance writer. You can find his article, Narcissists Aren't Really So Bad, Just Ask These Narcissists at Slate. Nick, welcome to Think.
Yeah, thank you, Krys. Thank you for having me.
So you built this article around a guy named Lee Hammock, who has built a large following as a narcissism influencer. What kind of content has he produced about this?
So Lee is on TikTok and he is on YouTube and all the major video apps. He does a lot of videos that are like conversations with a narcissist where he plays both sides and sort of pokes fun at the way that narcissists will misinterpret a question or not hear someone or blame someone for a minor flaw. But I mean, behind the humor, he is trying to, talk about narcissistic personality disorder in a more realistic way. He is, a married father of 3. He's 40. He lives in North Carolina. But yeah, he does have quite a following. That's about 500,000 people on YouTube, more than 500,000 Instagram, and about 2 million on TikTok. And he told me his message is that, if people see him, they're acknowledging that he is a narcissist and he doesn't seem like the kind of monster that people associate with the term that people will, get help, which is what he has done. He is in therapy for narcissism. He has been for years. One interesting thing he told me is that he realized he was a narcissist in a fight with his wife. He had this warehouse job that he hated in his 30s, like I think a lot of people with warehouse jobs. And he thought he could be something more. He wanted to be an actor, and his wife told him that actors don't make a lot of money. And he got very upset because he thought it was an assessment of his abilities. And at one point he blamed their infant son on his lack of career focus, and she called him a narcissist. And he started like rage Googling to dispute her. And then he found the official criteria in the DSM and he identified with it. He told me he always knew he was a little bit off. He had brothers and his emotional reaction was never quite as deep. He's one of a handful of people I talk to and a handful of people out there on social media who are self-aware narcissists. And it is quite different from the perception.
How do mental health professionals officially diagnose narcissistic personality disorder? This is one of those conditions where there's no blood test, right?
Yeah. I mean, as you said, it is in the DSM. The biggest criteria is, a need for, a pattern of grandiosity, a need for admiration, and there's also a lack of empathy. I talked to a guy named Craig Malkin, who's a instructor at Harvard Medical, and he has written a lot about narcissists and treated people with narcissistic personality disorder. And as he pointed out to me, like abuse patterns are not in the DSM when it comes to narcissistic personality. So I found that it is like a lot of, mental disorders. There's just one thing that you can't process normally. Some people are depressed and bad news is difficult for them to process, or they're anxious, so fears are difficult to process. And for narcissists, they have to keep up a high self-image, and when something injures it, like a crappy job, they become a bit neurotic and quick thinking and spiral a bit. So I think that's probably the sure sign someone is a narcissist. And empathy is not non-existent. They just have some trouble with it because there's this other thing in their life and in their psyche that, you know, blocks it a bit.
Do patterns of narcissistic behavior change over time? I don't want to be too flippant about this, but a lot of 2-year-olds, a lot of teenagers behave in ways that might strike people as somewhat narcissistic. Do people with narcissistic personality disorder find that it kind of wax and wanes over time and according to the situation?
I have not found a lot of research about prognosis. I do know that, there is therapy available. It's a personality disorder, so it tends not to be treated with pharmaceuticals. But intense talk therapy has helped a lot of people sort of realize their patterns that are irrational and choose more beneficial ones.
Not I mean, Lee Hammock gets credit because not a lot of people with narcissistic personality disorder, uh, ever seek treatment according to a lot of sources. Do we know why that's the case?
No, I could not tell you for sure. I do know that, that the term has become somewhat toxic. There are a lot of Facebook groups with names like narcissist, narcissist awareness and expose the narcissist with truth. They trade warning signs. They have memes that are rather cruel, and they have simple maxims like to preserve one's health, you must abandon the narcissist. So in a lot of these forums that are talking about narcissists and where people are labeling their ex-partners or their parents as narcissists, um, the term has come to mean someone just slimy, someone who absolutely has no ability to form empathy, and someone manipulative. That was one of the big things that most of the narcissists I talked to disputed, the idea that they have some sort of like long game to manipulate people. I mean, Lee Hammock told me that most of his narcissistic problems come from impulse. Like if he really thought about some of these comments, maybe he wouldn't have made them. There's no like long con. But when it is applied this way, I think people don't want to be diagnosed with it. And then, sort of the Google trend line for searching for narcissists and related terms, it goes gradually up throughout 2016 and then reaches a peak in January of 2017 and has been pretty high since then. And yeah, of course, Donald Trump is often dubbed a narcissist, usually by political pundits. It's a popular dig from Maureen Dowd or George Conway. Even some clinicians have gotten in, despite a longstanding rule about not diagnosing public figures that you haven't examined. Um, so yeah, when there is that kind of talk about narcissism, when there is maybe a narcissism scare that really paints them as toxic people, you probably just don't want that term. And I think that's one of the issues when people go so far outside the normal diagnosis. I mean, I've spent some time in these groups for survivors of narcissistic abuse, and people come from a place of deep, genuine hurt, and they have faced abuse. Um, but I'm not sure you can. I was warned by experts that it's often the idea that somebody is abusive and the idea that somebody is a narcissist, these are often conflated. And there are people who are abusive who are not narcissists, and narcissists who are not abusive.
So it sounds like a lot of us have this sense that we know a person with narcissistic personality disorder when we see them, but we may not have all the criteria right, right? To your point, maybe someone's just a bad person that we call a narcissist and vice versa.
I think this the recent talk around narcissism has reminded me a little bit of a scare from like 20 years ago about sociopaths. There's like a big pop psychology book called, The Narcissist Next Door, or I'm sorry, The Sociopath Next Door. And it was sold with a very scary tagline that 1 in 25 Americans secretly has no conscience and can do anything without guilt. Um, and I think narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder are kind of going along the same trend line where we know some people just aren't right. Like they're just some people just rub us the wrong way, and even the narcissists I spoke to are, some of their thinking is icky. But what I think we're trying to think of like a scientific or a clinical way to explain it. Um, I and it often drifts out of it often drifts out of strong scientific criteria.
What was your impression watching content produced by Lee Hammock and maybe other people in the self-aware narcissists sphere? Um, did it sound like he was trying to excuse his behavior, explain his behavior, just document his experience?
I think he is trying to document his experience, and I think he also is trying to amuse. Like his videos are very funny. Um, Another guy I talked to named Jacob Skidmore, his content was more sad, and a lot of the stuff that he produces, it's kind of like an ask me anything. So people come out with him with a lot of curiosity. He posted on YouTube as the Nameless Narcissist, and he wrote a memoir. But when I talked to him, like, I began to realize how much this condition affects the people who have it. I mean, he told me that his every waking moment is consumed by the thought of, like, how can I be impressive? He told me that he can't, like, read for fun because he just is filled with the thought of, how is this going to make me sound smarter? He has very few friends because having friends means he has to sort of put on a show, put on an era where he can seem impressive. He quit YouTube for a while because that was just guarding his image on a large scale. I mean, he's a 25-year-old guy, and he lives in Ohio, and he's had stints in like the army and working as a correction officer. And I think that there's too much hierarchy in those jobs that it made it difficult for him to handle. Um, yeah, sometimes it's just content that gives an insider's view of what it is like inside the mind of a narcissist, and sometimes it is unpleasant. He told me about like an incident where he cheated on a girlfriend because he wanted to show her he didn't care. Um, and yeah, Lee's videos too often talk about things like love bombing and what's going through the narcissist's mind when they are plying someone with compliments and gifts at the beginning of a relationship. But yeah, they definitely do not. They did not really seem like monsters to me. And I talked to a few people too who were not like content creators, people who just were self-aware narcissists that had come to some support groups. Like the support sphere and the groups for people with the disorder are a lot smaller than the sphere of people who, you know, identify as people who are abused by narcissists, but they're out there. And yeah, I talked to a few of them. It wasn't difficult journalistically. If you tell a narcissist you want to talk to them about them, they're pretty much game.
Yeah, it does sound pretty exhausting to have narcissistic personality disorder if you don't have skills to control certain kinds of thoughts.
Yeah, I spoke to a guy in Italy who is sort of a colleague. He worked for the Italian version of Vice, and he's a diagnosed narcissist. And he introduced me to the term narcissistic collapse, which I found used on a lot of forums. But that describes an incident where your carefully accrued self-image just something happens to harm it. He told me that he had this job for Vice that he really liked, where he was covering music and he was doing translation, and then it just seemed like he was tasked with covering, some pretty dumb pop acts that he didn't respect, and he just immediately couldn't handle it. Like the next day, he had to go in and raise a complaint. He tried to do music himself for about 2 years, and it ended in like a final unemployment check with, and then he also told me about a relationship that ended, and he was like living in a subletted flat for a while. And I think I think these are things that would bother anyone. I think we all have like a self-image that we like to keep up, and when something happens, like we have some sort of career setback or relationship setback that makes it so we don't like appear how we thought we were. That's hard for anyone, but I've just found that for the narcissists, it's just something they can't handle. Again, some of them do learn skills that help them, and I should say that the people who are willing to talk to me might be a self-selected bunch of people who are really trying. But yeah, it strikes me as an incredibly difficult condition to live with. And also the people I talk to, like their level of empathy for other people, it definitely was not zero. I mean, I had some lengthy conversations, and afterwards, somebody emailed me asking me not to use a portion of it where they admitted they had difficulty caring about a past partner because they were worried that that past partner would read the story and learn that. Um, so yeah, I mean, they definitely did talk about people in their lives with some care.
You mentioned, Nick, that it might be a self-selecting group of people, of self-aware narcissists who are willing to talk to you. It's not for nothing that a lot of them seem to have gravitated toward producing online content, or having podcasts or whatever. Is there some indication that this world of self-produced media content these days is an outlet that people with NPD find appealing, whether they talk about their disorder or something else?
I've not found a lot of scientific research about social media and people specifically with narcissistic personality disorder, but I think right now, like at this time of like personality driven politics of like influencers, it's easy to see a lot of narcissism around, like lowercase narcissism. It seems like people are rewarded for behaviors that we would consider antisocial in our personal lives. I don't know if you've ever watched The Real Housewives, but it's a popular show and no one should act like that. Um, so I think part of the narcissism scare that we have now might just be a little bit due to where the culture is. I mean, we did talk a little bit about how, the candidacy of Donald Trump raised Google searches for narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. And for in a lot of like the cottage industry of people who talk about narcissism, there is this perception that it is kind of a superpower. You know, if you search narcissist or narcissism into YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts or like Amazon, you'll probably find a lot of content made by people with various degrees of qualification about dealing with narcissists, about leaving narcissists. Um, and I think many of them have concluded that, you know, many people attribute a power to narcissists to be able to control another person or charm a country. I think that explanation is a bit simplistic, but among sort of the narcissism cottage industry, it's often the place in our culture is often conflated with the level of narcissism that might be out there.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not excusing bad behavior committed by people with narcissistic personality disorder when that happens. However, it's also, or can be also, quite difficult to live with someone who has severe depression or severe anxiety, and no one says run as far away from that person as you possibly can for your own good. Do you think there's some reason why people with diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder don't come in for the kind of compassion that we have cultivated now, rightfully, most people would say, for folks with other kinds of mental illnesses?
It's a good question. Um, I mean, I think one other thing that's happening in our culture, and I write about mental health often. I think we are kind of coming to terms with trauma and how many people have experienced trauma and how much trauma comes from things that would have been considered normal to like kids in the 80s and 90s. The whole like category of religious trauma started about 10 years ago to describe some people who lived in fundamentalist households and are having issues with that. So I think maybe perhaps empathetically, society is more concerned with the victims of bad behavior than the proprietors, even if we can give them a name that is also in the DSM. I think that's part of the reason why they've not gathered as much sympathy. And as I learned in talking to them, sometimes their thought process is a little icky to be around. But another thing is that, rallying people to leave narcissists is a business model of sorts. There is this small cottage industry of it. I mean, like the queen of this is a psychologist named Romani uh, Durvasulu, and she has about 2 million YouTube subscribers with videos telling people to leave narcissists, to abandon them. She's written 3 books on it. I asked her to speak to my article. I never heard back, but yeah, I mean, she has flat out said that narcissists cannot change. The only solution is to leave them. And in the sphere of content creators and there are a lot of people who rally against narcissists and narcissists abuse, I think, as a general response to our new awareness of trauma. Again, sometimes I don't think their definitions or their terms are quite clear, and it creates the larger problem that people who have narcissistic personality disorder might not want to admit it and get help. But I think that's why maybe we've not sympathized with them in the way that we would other people. I mean, when I was in these groups, I was sort of shocked by the language people would use. I don't think anyone has ever written in a Facebook group, "You must abandon the depressive," or "Get away from the schizophrenic as fast as you can," or even people with personality disorders like borderline. Just the way we talk about narcissists is completely different.
So we treat it strictly like a character flaw as opposed to recognizing that there's some component of mental illness going on.
Yeah, and for some of these people who have dealt with narcissistic people and dealt with what they described as abuse, I don't want to diminish what they've felt. There are reasons to abandon relationships, definitely. There are reasons to cut people out of your life. But yeah, there is just such a blind spot of sympathy for an actual DSM recognized condition.
The idea that a narcissist cannot change, that is pretty terrifying if you have suffered because someone with NPD has done something to you or, affected your life. But did every mental health professional that you spoke to believe that sort of nothing can be done for people with NPD?
I did not speak to anyone who thought nothing could be done. I mean, I think the mainstream consensus of psychiatry and clinical psychology is that a lot can be done through talk therapy.
What does that therapy look like? Do you have is it about sort of challenging misperceptions? What did you learn about it?
Like a lot of therapy for personality disorders, it's sort of trying to find the thoughts that are being caused by the disorder, by the misperception. Jacob, the guy I talked to out in Ohio, who's had some problems with narcissistic personality disorder, he and his therapist will just go over his thought process, and she will challenge him about some ideas that he, doesn't care about people when he's made some other statements to the contrary. When he admits to things like only reading for the sake of trying to impress people, she will challenge him, like, why is that important to you? How easy would it be to just forget that for an hour? Like, what if you tried not to have that in your mind? So it's a lot of just challenging people's perceptions when they think that they're caused by narcissistic personality disorder. And then beyond that, I think it's very individualized. I'm not sure I can speak that much more to it. But yeah, that was just my perception, is that the basic prescription is a lot of talk therapy that challenges misguided perceptions.
Is it possible to hold people with narcissistic personality disorder accountable for bad acts they commit while also giving them compassion because they are living with a mental health disorder?
Yeah, I think that's critical. I've seen on Lee Hammock's YouTube channel some videos where his wife chimes in and is interviewed, and I think that's pretty critical to the treatment and to living with somebody with this condition, is that you do hold them accountable when they say things that are part of the disease. Again, that sounds exhausting, but yeah, I mean, they certainly can respond to the people around them.
What does the medical science community think about the origins of this condition? Is it something caused by nature or nurture or both, or do we not know?
We do not know. I can't tell you. There's reasons to think it is very common. There's one study from the National Institutes of Health that estimated that 6% of Americans might meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. I mean, that was one of those studies where you take like several thousand, in this case 35,000 questionnaires from people, and then sort of mine through the data and figure out who reaches the criteria and how common it is. Some other experts put the number at lower, but we are talking about millions of people. There's some thought that it could have to do with insecurity as a child, but the short answer is we don't know what causes it.
Does it start to show up in childhood when people think back on their lives?
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty common trend among the people I spoke to, is that they always knew that they were a little bit off. That when they had to have an empathetic or an emotional reaction to something, theirs didn't feel as true or as deep as classmates or siblings.
So, is it possible to cultivate the kind of empathy that helps people with narcissistic personality disorder make reasonable choices in their interactions with other people that they care about?
That is a hard question. Um, I know people do it. I mean, like I said, it's such a common disease that that yeah, I believe that there are people who are able to live with somebody with narcissistic personality disorder and sort of come to a way with to deal with it. No, a lot of those 6% are not diagnosed. But but yeah, to answer your question, I think that is entirely possible.
You mentioned Lee Hammock and his many followers on social media. I'm curious about the comments that follow his posts. Are the people who go to interact and discuss what he's had to say, are they people who relate to having narcissistic personality disorder? Are they people who have suspected interactions with a person with NPD?
Most comments are pretty positive. I think people who are searching for content for people with NPD find his posts. There's occasional crossover from the online sphere of people who are dealing with what they describe as narcissistic trauma and narcissistic abuse. He told me he got one comment that by doing all these videos he makes narcissism seem normal, which was, I guess, meant as an insult. Like, you're going to confuse people into thinking that they should stay around narcissists if you're so, charming and funny. And he said that was exactly my point, but the opposite sort of conclusion.
I'm curious about what people who've been affected by narcissists how long those relationships can last. Like, are narcissists able to have lifelong partnerships with other people? I mean, you mentioned that Lee Hammock was and is married to the same person and has kids. Day to day, do you have a sense of how different his relationship is than any that you or I might have?
Again, he has made a lot of videos of this, and I think, yeah, I mean, I think his wife is aware that he's a narcissist and, deals with it as a lot of people deal with mental health conditions in their partners' lives. Um, so yeah, I think it is common to be able to have a long relationship with a narcissist. Um, I also spent some time talking to sort of people who run these forums that are about what they describe as narcissistic abuse, or encouraging people to leave narcissists. I spoke to a woman named Julie Langdon, like a woman in her mid 50s who lives in England, and she said that she was in a relationship for 20 years with somebody who was controlling. He was never diagnosed as a narcissist, but that's what she considers him, just because he had a professional job and he got a lot of praise, and it really differed from how we acted at home. Um, but yeah, she was with this person for 20 years. Now she runs this forum on Facebook. I think it's the largest about narcissism, or because it has like almost 300,000 people. And she just described like running this forum to me. And when you have a forum that large or a group that large on Facebook, a lot of your time is spent erasing scam posts and things like that. And then the rest of her time, she talks to people who are in abusive relationships and even and she even tries to find help for them in their country, wherever they are. And I felt a bit weird calling her up just to dither about her terminology. Um,
Because you had no reason to doubt the veracity of her claims or the people that she's interacting with.
no, I have no reason to doubt. Yeah, and I think in these groups, people talk about, they use a lot of psychology terms. They use terms like gaslighting, love bombing, just these things that have sort of escaped therapy talk and come into the mainstream. And maybe our understanding of narcissism as it feeds into these groups and into these online forums is just another way that a term has sort of escaped therapy space and come into kind of colloquial usage. I mean, yeah, she told me that her partner had never been diagnosed. She named her group awareness of abuse and narcissism just because that's what she understood happened to her. And she even told me that she thinks that the term has been used too much. She told me, I think that a lot of people just think every person that's horrible to them is a narcissist, and that's not the case. So I think when people think about it, it's, yeah, not all abuse is narcissism, and not all narcissism manifests in abuse.
Nick, was this piece a hard sell to the editors at Slate, or did they approach you? Because, as you mentioned, the overwhelming majority of what we can find online these days about narcissistic personality disorder, or what we may think is that, are quite negative and have very little sympathy to extend to people who are living with the condition.
No, my editor was interested immediately. I think because narcissism is such a buzzword, and I've written a few pieces for Slate that sort of look at perceptions of mental health and mental health practices and how it falls short of our exact scientific understanding. So they were definitely into it.
Did the people in the support groups for folks who feel like they've been harmed by narcissists object to the very idea of considering this from another perspective?
I mean, I definitely had some people who did not email me back who ran large forums and who wrote books about leaving narcissists or overcoming narcissist abuse. When I emailed people, I was very clear that I was talking to self-aware narcissists and getting their perspective. So I think that maybe the people who objected, you know, didn't talk to me. I am interested in, hearing their perspective. Um, but yeah, there is a lot out there about narcissists that kind of drifts a bit from the strict DSM diagnosis. I I think that we do, like I said, some people just strike us as not quite right for for whatever reason. Maybe it's somebody who was an ex, maybe it's a parent that we had, maybe it's the president, maybe it's the owner of a major electric vehicle company, and we're trying to just come up with one unifying explanation or term. I think just like the craze over sociopaths about 20 years ago, there's kind of a need to cut off a certain population and just sort of dub them as like non-playable characters emotionally. And I see the need to do that from some of the people I talked to who had dealt with abusive situations. But I think it's just to just sort of put on this term and decide you can wash your hands of this person. It's just, yeah, it always strikes me as a little bit too easy. It's comforting because we can kind of, we attribute we attribute power to narcissists. We attribute the power to charm to them, even though that's not really backed up by clinical science. The idea that they can charm us is very prevalent among sort of like the colloquial world of content creators about narcissistic abuse. And maybe it's easier to think that somebody charmed us with this superhuman ability that comes from their innate differentness. But yeah, I think we all have a capability to do really bad things, and sort of deciding that one part of the population is just this one thing is, and you don't have to consider them, and you just have to get away from them. I think that's just a little bit too easy.
Well, you write about the fact that, like most mental illnesses, people with narcissistic personality disorder probably experience it on a spectrum, right? For some people, it may be very mild. For some people, the case might be quite severe. Um, it does seem challenging to draw a bright line between someone who's just a little stuck on themselves and someone who has a diagnosable mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is why, why narcissist has become the term now for an abusive person, why they're sort of used so synonymously, is because we see a lot of narcissism, in our culture. We, yeah, we see it on reality TV, we see it in influencers, we see it in politics. There's people who think a lot of themselves and are willing to allow their own, and who are willing to like allow their own self-interests to override other people. I don't think that is perceived as a obstacle to success in our culture. Um, so yeah, I think that's why narcissism has become why narcissist has become the kind of like the scary creature of our era.
It almost sounds like you perceive a moral panic around this.
I mean, the more time I spent in these forums and I realized how big they are, just hundreds of thousands of people saying, leave the narcissist, abandon the narcissist. My mom was a narcissist and this is what happened to me. There's like an annual convention now of survivors of narcissistic parents or children of narcissistic parents. And yeah, I guess the more time I spent, the more like when I was just Googling, when I was running like these terms through, where we get our content through Amazon, through Spotify, there was just so many people speaking so assuredly that you need to cut off and get rid of the narcissist. Um, Yeah, and very little sympathetic towards people with this condition. It did. The more I researched it, the more it surprised me.
What does a self aware narcissist need from the people with whom they have intimate relationships?
I think it depends on the person because there are different degrees of severity. Um, but I mean, I think for people who are trying, just some understanding that some of what they do has to do with mental health. In talking to narcissists, one thing that struck me was how similar it was to other mental health problems. Like a lot of people, I've experienced depression, I've had issues with anxiety, and I've just known that my perception is off because of this reason, and I need to get a handle on it. And that really seemed similar to the narcissists I talked to. They realized that their perception is off because they have a pathological need to keep up this self-image. In some cases, a grandiose self-image. In some cases, an image of somebody who's simply successful and special. Um, but yeah, I think for people for lack of a better word, put up with these people, just understanding that some of the things that they say that are troubling come from a disorder, and if they're working on it, and you know, that's something.
You mentioned love bombing earlier. There may be people who actually haven't heard this term. Can you explain what that means and how that relates to narcissistic personality disorder?
So, love bombing is another term that has come from like therapy speak. Like when you immediately start seeing someone or begin a new relationship, you tell them that you were the one, that you feel that they are meant for you, that you've never felt like this with anybody before. You send them gifts, you do all these things to implant the idea that what you have is very romantic and special early on. And for some people who are abusive, this is a tactic where the person is then excuses a lot of things afterwards. A lot of bad behavior um, is overlooked because you've already established that this person is your special person, that they love you so much. It is a tactic that is attributed to narcissists, but well, Lee Hammock, who makes videos, the guy who I talked about, who's sort of like the king of the self-aware narcissists on TikTok, he has made videos about it, just saying that when the narcissist does find someone new and does start a relationship, some of that can be real because everything is grandiose and big for them. But when something happens that sort of turns that switch, the narcissist might not know how to deal with that like a normal person does, and they may find themselves resentful at the other person in the relationship. I should say that this is just like the personal account of Lee. It's not something I've heard about, in the clinical research. But yeah, another thing that was often disputed among the narcissists I spoke to is that they do have those kinds of plans to just hook someone in and hypnotize them. Many of them told me that's the biggest misconception, that they do things on impulse.
It's not a long game for them.
Yeah, and you know, uh, Jacob, the guy who goes by the nameless narcissist on YouTube, he told me that that's sort of ridiculous because he can't admit to himself that he cares for somebody. Like that's hard for him to admit because then somebody would have power over him, and given his condition, and I don't know if I should say condition, that sounds a little bit crude, but given his mindset and how it's been affected by narcissistic personality disorder, that's a bit terrifying for him. So he's told me about like relationships he's been in where his partner has tried to make him jealous, just do little things, talking to other men, and he wouldn't take the bait. He thought it would be beneath him to show her that he cared enough that she was doing this. Again, that's sort of an anecdotal thing. But that among the narcissists I spoke to, the self-aware narcissists, that was what they described as the biggest misconception, is that they do these things that are just terribly manipulative and have a long plan to hypnotize their partner.
There is, Nick, a pretty extraordinary irony in a guy like Lee Hammock becoming, I think you said, the king of self-aware narcissists on TikTok. I mean, surely he's aware of this. I
Yeah.
mean, did you talk to him about the fact that someone who has struggled with these grandiose feelings and the sense that he's built for bigger things than, a warehouse job, has found fame talking about his narcissism?
I tried to goad him about that in our interview. I asked if building a TikTok or a YouTube following was a bit more apt for his particular set of skills and his particular mindset. He really didn't bite on that. He just says he enjoys doing it. I guess before he became like the narcissism person on TikTok, he was doing little comedy videos anyway. But I definitely see the logic there. And I definitely could tell that when I was talking to the narcissists, there is something a little bit different. They do kind of like, they are very careful in their presentation. I've done thousands of interviews with people, and the narcissists were a lot more measured and than most people I talk to. But I mean, like I said, it's a continuum. As I'm speaking to you, I have notes. I care about how I'm coming off. So, but yeah, I definitely could see why the narcissists would gravitate towards TikTok and why the self-aware narcissist movement could take off there.
Did anyone you interviewed talk about how their lives have changed since they became self-aware about their narcissistic personality disorder and started therapy? Like, what's different once they seek treatment?
I mean, Lee has been able to sort of nip some behavior in the bud. He was having these fights with his wife about what he could accomplish in his career, about sort of what in their home life might be holding him back. And he's come to realize that these might be the results of a condition, and therefore, he shouldn't say the first thing on his mind. For a lot of people, it's just been, the treatment has been a reality check, and they can sort of now sort their behavior from normal behavior to behavior spurred by narcissistic personality disorder.
So is part of the therapy to, again, ironically, sort of think through how you will be perceived based on your behavior?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in narcissism that are circularly ironic. But yeah, it is all about examining behavior. And I guess I mean, I don't want to make too many jokes about it. For the narcissist, that is uncomfortable because you have to look at your behavior realistically as opposed to how you want your behavior to be perceived, which is very, very difficult for many of them. But yeah, that is, I think, the main remedy in therapy.
Nick Keppler is a freelance writer. You can find his article, Narcissists Aren't Really So Bad. Just Ask These Narcissists at Slate. Nick, thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and anywhere you get podcasts, or you can go to our website, think.kera.org. Again, I'm Krys Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.